right, y'all. Welcome. How's it going? This week's Griscom stream. Man, I had a pretty nice weekend, but I'm happy to be back in it here. What y'all have been thinking about. Definitely want to hang around and answer some questions. So feel free to start putting those in the chat. As always, we appreciate super chats, but I try to answer as many questions as I can while we're hanging out. And thanks everyone so much for the support over the past couple of weeks. People showing up on our Patreon as well as on our YouTube channels really meant a lot to Matt and I, and we're feeling pretty excited. And yeah, I did knock out, cut off a few inches of hair. I'm feeling very free. I realized it was not going to be very sustainable as I started to get previews of what the summer was bringing. From what I've been reading, apparently the summer is going to be one of the hottest in decades. So. Not really looking forward to that. And yeah, anyways, I want to take some questions and hang out for a little bit. I'll try to stay as long as I can. I have a big job. A tree fell down in my backyard, so I have to after this go and cut that down once it gets a little bit cooler out here. So anyways, I'm down to hang out for a little bit, but I'm definitely going to have to run out and deal with that. And yeah, appreciate all of y'all so much. And this week, I'm really excited. For our show, we're going to be doing a deep dive into Mexico, AMLO's legacy and his fight against the national and international bourgeoisie. We're going to be joined by Kurt Hackbrath, who's a really great reporter out of Mexico, who's going to give us a kind of rundown of the past few years of AMLO's presidency, and also this fight over control of the natural resources of Mexico. So I'm still really looking forward. I'm really looking forward to that because we definitely need to be doing as much outreach and conversations about Mexico as possible because for whatever reason, it's a big blind spot in the U.S. left, and it's really damaging, especially because there is a very, very well organized counter narrative about what's going on in Mexico. If you read any of the the big papers, New York Times, The Economist, there's a lot of lies about AMLO and the movement there. That doesn't mean we're not going to engage in criticism where it's due, but it's pretty incredible to read the kind of big international reporting on Mexico and then talk to people more on the ground there. One of the first things, one of my earlier segments when I was working on TMBS was actually, a deep dive into the way that Western media was portraying AMLO's, style of governance, which they were, obviously very critical of, despite the fact that AMLO was bringing in a lot of people into the political process that typically weren't very much included. So anyways, looking forward to that. That will be coming up on Thursday as well. And also, just so folks know, I want to make sure to shout them out. Those tunes that we're playing up at the top, they're done by one of Matt's old friends and a new friend of mine, Christoph Brun. I put a link to his website in the chat, so definitely check out his music. It's very good stuff. Let's see. First, someone says, first haircut in 1.5 years, something like that. I remember. I was growing my hair out before the pandemic, honestly, just because I didn't really feel like I could afford to cut my hair, and I wasn't going to get in trouble for having long hair with Michael. And then, obviously, the pandemic just sort of made that choice for me. But yeah, let's see, y'all. Yeah, I'm really excited to bring in Kurt on Thursday, so it'll be a good conversation on Mexico. All right. There's some questions here. I want to make sure that I'm not missing anything before we talk. I want to talk a little bit about SCOTUS because there's a lot of hypocrisy that's coming up there around that right now. But let me see. Actually, somebody mentioned in the chat, Peru has their elections this Sunday, which are going to be huge. For folks who haven't been following it, we've been covering it a lot on the show, so you can definitely go and find some more clips to get more in-depth conversations. But essentially right now, you have a candidate, Pedro Castillo, who is a representative of not just the left movements in Peru, but also the indigenous movements as well. It's a very exciting campaign that shocked a lot of people from the outside. but really has been a kind of popular uprising of working class folks as well as rural working class folks too, which is why so many people missed it, because it wasn't a campaign and a movement that was so centered in the major cities of Peru, but something that was very much incorporating people from all across the country. And it is quite the radical campaign. There are promises to rewrite the Constitution. There are promises to basically renegotiate the power dynamics between private capital and private business and the state. There are promises of campaigns to nationalize and democratize as many industries as possible, as well as important conversations about weakening the power of the few who own the vast majority of the land, the people who have been able to concentrate so much wealth and land over the past few years. It's an incredibly important campaign, not only because of what, the positives of the campaign, what Peru Libre and Pedro Castillo are putting forward, but also what they're running against, which is a return to neoliberal authoritarianism. And I think people should always keep that in mind when you're seeing some of these kind of more liberal and bourgeois critics of Pedro Castillo, especially in English press, criticizing his campaign. Remember that the alternative here is very clear, a regression into one of the most brutal right-wing authoritarian families, and also that right-wing return to like a very staunch and revitalized neoliberalism is something that is extremely beneficial to a kind of jet-set international class that very much fears Pedro Castillo's movement, not just because it's left-wing and threatens capital, but because it's rural. It's something that has come out of cultures that are very much not respected from kind of upper middle class bourgeoisie, the upper middle class bourgeoisie, the super educated folks. It is a very much a campaign that is bringing in a lot of people into the political process there. And you should remember that when you hear the kind of, kicking and screaming that you get a lot from these kind of liberal commentators, but really looking forward to the result. And I also wanted to mention too, shout out to the DSA who will be sending a delegation there. It has to be noted, despite again, some of the people from the Magic Money Brigade were getting worked up about DSA sending representatives down there as if it was some kind of like escapist move for them, when in fact DSA was invited explicitly by Peru Libre, who were worried that there's going to be attempts at fraud. And now DSA has been denied, along with Progressive International, the ability to go and observe the elections as an official election observer, right? There's a tension there already that we're seeing from the state, and people are worried that there is potential of mass fraud from people who don't want the country to fall into the hands of left-wing and working class voices. So it's very important that DSA is contributing and fighting and standing with Peru Libre and the working class people there as they they fight essentially for their democracy against the return to right-wing authoritarian neoliberalism. So very, very exciting. And thanks so much, Daniel, for the super chat. Appreciate all of y'all hanging out. We'll don't be bashful. I'm watching the chat for questions. The Magic Money Brigade. It's the superstructure people. It's a small little podcast that gets really worked up about this kind of stuff. Let me see. I want to make sure that we're going to be able to get to this the SCOTUS stuff beforehand. Before we get to, before I get a little bit distracted. Jesus Christ. Sorry, I'm not seeing the chat real quick. Give me a second. Sorry, y'all. All right, sorry about that. we're using this new system, and I'm not really an expert on how to use it, but I got back here. Um, and here we go. Daniel Krieger says he's heard Castillo criticized for having right-wing social views like opposing gay marriage and abortion. What's up with that? I mean, we've talked about this at length, right? It's certainly these things are certainly an issue, but these aren't the things that are on the docket here. And when it comes to those questions, these are things that he's not running on restricting or attacking these communities. Just is not incorporating the more progressive view of these things, which is a problem and is a social struggle, and it's not something to sideline at all. The point that we've been trying to make here about those questions is that they've very much been at the forefront in the United States, because it appeals to a certain kind of American progressive audience. To say, okay, well, I'm not going to recognize that what's happening here is the development of a more robust left movement that gives us the opportunity to embolden these kind of social forces. It's presented as a way to basically excuse any attempts to attack Pedro Castillo, right? And these are things that are developments and are serious questions within the political movements there, within Peru Libre. These are things that are, it's not like they're being ignored on the political scene. And I think that it's important to recognize that there's a reason that these narratives come to the forefront in the United States when people aren't talking about the fact that they're talking about nationalizing industry. They're not talking about the fact that they're talking about rewriting the Constitution. They're not talking about the fact that they're talking about redistributing land. They're talking about these kind of issues that in the United States in particular get people really, really worked up, so much so that they're not paying attention to the fact that this is very much a ground, bottom up movement that has its own contradictions and tensions within it. There's things that should be addressed and challenged. Absolutely, these are things that people are engaging in conversations with and social struggle, but to try to put a kind of more American understanding of these questions, I'm talking about socially, and just implant them on top of, this critical election, I think is a bit of a disservice. And one of the things too, and somebody asked, were any of the other candidates progressive on these issues? Sune said, were any of the other candidates progressive on these issues? Veronica Mendoza was very much the preferred candidate of the left, and that their candidacy represented and really ran a lot of these more social values that very much missed the experience and like the rising dissatisfaction that the working class and in particular the rural classes of Peru were feeling, right? And it should be noted that Mendoza has gone into coalition now with Castillo, so is a part of that kind of political calculus as well, right? So these things are going in conversation with one another. It's not like the way it gets presented in the U.S. is that Castillo is like running on this, this campaign of hate and bigotry. No, this person just is not somebody. This is an evangelical Christian who has, social views that we would deem to be, conservative, and they should absolutely be challenged and dealt with. But the way that people are trying to use this in the United States in particular, in international media in particular, is to say, oh, look at this person. We have to sideline him, and not to recognize that these things are developing within even that left coalition and that movement. And Antonio asks, and thanks so much for the super chat. What do you see as the difference between the coalitions and politics of Humala and Pedro Castillo? Well, I'm not a historian of Peru, but I would say that what you're definitely seeing from Pedro Castillo is a shift in the incorporation of the more rural movements in Peru, along with the undeniable indigenous character of these movements. The way that a lot of people who I've been talking to have described Pedro Castillo's campaign and coalition is that it's left wing and indigenous, without ever sort of, in a way that both of these things are very much baked into the entirety of the project, much like Evo Morales, right? You can't separate Evo Morales's like indigenousness from his left-wing politics like you could with, say, Yaku Perez. So that's certainly is a major difference. And I would also say programmatically, what you're seeing from Pedro Castillo's campaign, and this is specifically because of his association with Peru Libre, is a deep commitment to a more radical and revolutionary economic program. They self-describe themselves as Marxist-Leninists. In practice, I think it's going to be very different from some kind of revolutionary state takeover of industry, and more of beating down and weakening the power that the bourgeoisie has, the ruling class, the rich, the wealthy, the powerful, in the international wealthy and powerful, by the way, in that country, because which is functionally, we found, is one of the best ways to build up class power, particularly working class power, is to use the state as a tool to push back on the economic power that those communities have. So that's the really exciting thing about Pedro Castillo's campaign, that it's not just kind of left or like left nationalist in the more traditional sense, that it has this real opening and rupture to have a long lasting class realignment, which is very, very exciting. Jacob says, no more poverty in a rich country. Reminds me of the Parenti clip you played on TMBS, which is a great Michael Parenti clip, where he makes the point that there are no poor countries. There are poor people and rich people. The reason that we pay so much attention to a lot of these, I'm talking about like the American empire pays so much attention to a lot of countries, is not because they're poor, but because they're extremely rich. So it's definitely an exciting way of framing it that I think is going to be much more prevalent going on. Sorry, y'all, let me turn on my fan real quick because it's hot. Thank y'all. And Champagne Communista says, Castillo pulling up to the polls on his horse and in his indigenous attire. His incredible look. Thanks so much, Joe, for the chat here. And can you please speak to the rise of Nayib Bukele? U.S. media dislikes, so does government. He's mercurial, it seems. Yeah, I don't really have anything on the top on that, but I think that'd be something that'd be interesting to cover more in depth on the show. So I'll take a note of that. I appreciate the super chat there. Yeah, well, let me see, y'all. This is going to be a really exciting, few days as we're, following, as we're sort of following what's going on in Peru and hearing from folks who are on the ground. I'm looking forward and hoping for a victory for Peru Libre there. It's definitely a really incredible shift. If we could see, significant left-wing victories across the region after, just a couple of years ago, just seeing this powerful resurgent right-wing movement. So we'll be watching very closely, and it's been very exciting to see more and more American attention paid to it. And, we're hoping for positive results there as well. Well, I wanted to pull this up because I think this is interesting. Well, Daniel says, would a broader left-wing coalition usually involve, working together with people who have odious social views? I hope not. Well, no, the hope is that by building movements, we're able to eradicate those forces in the social bases that cultivate kind of odious, social views. But I'd also, remind folks that these things are always developing. There's, long histories of struggle that are included in all of these very critical social fights. And you can't just wish them to happen overnight, especially if that's going to mean that you're not going to be, if that you're not going to be building strong coalitions. So one of the most effective anti-racist tools is like the union struggle, right? Because you build and break down those kind of anti-solidarity, odious social views that have a base, they have a material basis. Why these kind of beliefs are developed and thrive in capitalist society. And the hope is to build coalitions that are able to transcend and to break those down, never to accept them or to incorporate them, but always to say that if you want to be popular, you need to have a popular in an outward-facing way of building politics that's bringing people in order to educate, in order to demystify, in order to destroy ignorance. That certainly, is going to be an important political project of any stripe, and most importantly, a socialist one. In these trying times, what are some things that give you hope and or inspiration? I have to say, I'm still riding the high of everyone's support for the workers at Warrior Met, and I saw that the boys in Alabama were able to deliver the check to make sure to the striking workers. That's been something that's been incredibly encouraging, and this feeling that more and more people are really recognizing that the system as it functions today is inadequate. I don't know, not to be cheesy, but that's really incredible from seeing what happened just these past few weeks regarding Palestine, when for years and years and years there was almost it felt like an enforced silence on a lot of these questions, and now people very much are bringing these things, paying attention to what's happening in the Israeli apartheid system, and are advocating for Palestinian people. It's not perfect. We have to build stronger, more targeted movements, and that's why I've been trying to promote people and tell people to check out BDS. But this simply just wasn't happening a few years ago. People sometimes accuse me of being negative because Matt and I, we talk a lot about how things are really wrong here in this country and also internationally. But the positive thing is that there's an audience of people who aren't just listening, but are actively trying to do something about it in a way that I didn't feel was the case as much like 5 years ago. That's an incredibly exciting thing. Let me see. All right, this is a similar kind of thing I think is interesting. So one thing that people who have been following me for a little while know, I have a very, very severe dislike for the Supreme Court. I think it's an anti-democratic institution. I think it's an institution that we need to challenge its power at every possibility, at every moment. But also that is something that is functionally anti-democratic. And I think this is an interesting little poll here. Sorry, y'all. I guess I'm not going to be able to share this with you. But there's an interesting piece that's in the New York Times, and I believe it was put up at SCOTUS blog. It was a survey from researchers at Harvard, Stanford, and the University of Texas, sort of going on about the important questions that are going to be brought before the Supreme Court in the next few weeks. And it's interesting to see where the Supreme Court rules versus where most people fall on it. One of the worst examples of this is the life sentences for juvenile offenders. In Jones v. Mississippi, the court ruled that juvenile offenders need not be deemed basically beyond saving or beyond hope of rehabilitation before a judge sentences them to die in prison. On this question, they have this was decided April 22nd, and the conservatives voted 6-3 to say that you can kill a juvenile, regardless of if you think that they can be helped out with rehabilitation and necessary services, right? That's what the Supreme Court ruled, but public polling on this paints a completely different picture. The public in general stands 71%. Say that before you can even consider sentencing a juvenile to death, to life without parole, that they need to be shown that they are unable to be reformed, to be rehabilitated. while 29% of Americans think that you don't have to have this kind of consideration beforehand. And this goes true for Democrats. Support no sentencing of a life without parole. 77% to 23%. But even Republicans go on the 64% to 36%. And it's just another example. And there's a few other questions in here, and it's a mixed bag, particularly on things that are very political, right? Affordable Care Act stuff. It looks, if you're a Republican, you think one way. If you're a Democrat, you think the other. Religious rights, there's actually a lot more consensus on that than you would think, even when it's used for basically the challenging against preventing people from attending in-person services during COVID. Anyways, the point here is that the general public is much more progressive on these questions than the Supreme Court. And it's just another example as to why we need to be having these questions being fought publicly, rather than in this kind of arbitrary way that we have it right now, where you get lifetime appointments that are able to solidify particular moments in time. Notably, very recently, Republican rule, which now allows, for a long time going forward, unless we do something kind of radical and shift this system, allows the kind of ghost of Trump and Trumpism to continue to poison our society. And I'll link to the poll. I would say that I think, that we should be fighting against the Supreme Court in general. But I wanted to make a point about what's going on with the Supreme Court fight right now, where, let me see. And I'll come back to grab some of these questions in a second, but I just want to make this point really quick. They're going to do it again with this damn Supreme Court. It's lining up again. Breyer looks like he's not going to retire when the Democrats have the ability to replace them with someone else, with a liberal judge, right? Again, I think the Supreme Court should be eradicated. But I'm just saying, like, from the politics level of it, it looks like they're going to do the same damn thing again. Just like what happened with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, where she refused to step down when the Democrats had the clear ability to replace her with someone else who shared their kind of political view, and instead waited until the worst case scenario happened. Donald Trump, came in. The same thing happened with other justices too, not stepping down in time to prevent a Republican takeover. And it's looking more and more and more like there is going to be a bloodbath in the upcoming in the midterms, right? Which could spell a lot of trouble for Joe Biden, and it would be disastrous if Breyer doesn't step down, and creates another opportunity for the Supreme Court to be a system that is completely dominated by GOP interests. I think that in any case, as socialists, because we're not whispering into Biden's ear, we need to be building up a strong, robust criticism of the court. We've had conversations with Matt Karp about times in American history where democracy, where the elected officials, where the elected government refused to accept the rulings of the Supreme Court. I think that's something that's necessary because, remember, judicial review was something that was taken by an extremely ambitious Supreme Court. Also, the Supreme Court's power and justification is to stop, the rule of the mob. And whenever you start reading the framers talk about the mob, right, or the majority, they're talking about you. They're talking about working people. A lot of the American system was designed to make sure that there would never be a working class movement that was able to engage in class war at the same level as the ruling class. The Supreme Court is a great example of that. Despite all of the nice things that you're sort of taught about, oh, well, the Supreme Court's function is to protect minorities in society. Look at American history, and you'll see a very, very clear example that is not the case. In fact, the Supreme Court, more often than not, stood with the state in its absolute war on minorities in this country. Beyond that, and every success, right, even looking at something like Roe v. Wade, these things didn't just pop out of thin air. They came out of mass movements that were demanding, in that case, a woman's right to have an abortion. And what happens when the Supreme Court settled the question? It put that question suspended in thin air, right, where now there's a very likely chance that we could see with this conservative majority on the Supreme Court that decades and decades and decades of precedent and feeling that question had been settled in the U.S., it could all be undone, and we could go back decades, in social progress in this country, because of the decisions of a few super wealthy and connected people. This is no way to run a functioning democracy. And I wanted to make one last point about this before I hear and read some of y'all's questions on this. Do you remember the kind of browbeating that people got when they made any kind of criticism of Joe Biden going into this election, right? When it had all been settled, right? And then you really see, the enthusiasm of the vote blue no matter who people, right? The first thing that they cite is the Supreme Court. And I've been saying this for years now. They make this point, and, they make it well, that, if you don't fall in line here, we're going to be living in a society that is going to be much more reactionary than the one you find yourself in today, right? Because they use the fear of a far-right Supreme Court, basically taking politics out of play, out of touch with all of us, to be decided by an unelected mass. Well, what happens when the Democratic Party is control of the branches that are necessary to prevent that kind of development from happening? You saw it under Obama, a complete failure to reckon with this, and you're seeing it right now with Biden. For every person who felt that they had the right to attack people for criticizing, giving Biden the mildest criticisms by screaming Supreme Court, Supreme Court, Supreme Court, they should be right now, with all of their rhetorical ability, be screaming and clamoring for Breyer to step down. But are we seeing that right now? For the most part, it's been complete silence. And that is extremely dangerous and should show you that those concerns that they had about this system, this kind of grand strategy game that they said that they participate in, was all a bunch of BS to prevent people from criticizing those who want to control, have their hands on the most powerful levers in this society. It's a joke. It's a joke. Look, what I'm saying is, like, there's the socialist criticism of the Supreme Court, right? And that's where I land, and I think that that's where we should be focusing our energy right now. But just trying to take a step back. All of these liberals who made this into their first and foremost concern going into this election, so much so that they were willing to wipe away all of Biden's evils, all of the things that he represented. Because don't forget for a second that Joe Biden's rise to power was propped up to prevent a populist movement that was trying to get people health care and was trying to make sure that people aren't burdened by extreme student loans, was trying to make sure that people got a fair wage for their work, right? They propped Biden up for this, right, to stop that from happening with the kind of, vague promise, but promise nonetheless, that they would not let the Supreme Court be suspended to this disaster situation again. And right now, when they have the opportunity to do something different, to make public campaigns to say that we need to make sure that we don't lose yet another justice, it's silence. It's an absolute joke. And it will never go away. Because every election from now on will be the most important election of your life. And I'm just saying that, these stakes aren't going away, and we can't let them use these kind of rhetorical bludgeons every time it comes time to vote, if they're not even going to follow through on the most basic things like this. All right. Let me see what we got here. RGB expected Hillary to be elected. Yeah, I remember James Carville wrote a book after Obama got elected that the Democrats were going to win the White House for the next 100 years. All of these people, I don't know if they know better or not, but they they always act as if the Democratic Party is never going to lose to the Republicans again. Antonio said, did anyone hear Justice Breyer's recent idiocies? You should definitely read them. A real believer in the Supreme Court, that one. Make sure. Antonio says, how would you go about engaging with people you don't know well when you hear them espousing far-right conspiracy theories? Is it worth the trouble trying to correct them? I think these things are all contextual. I think that conversations have the power to change folks, not necessarily in the sense of someone's going to change their, be like, oh, well, great point, I'm going to drop all this stuff. But it is important to not let people just espouse a bunch of nonsense and have that just be validated, because the only people who want to engage with them are people who are going to validate it. But, these are social questions for you, too. How do you want to engage with people around you in your community? I think it's really important to be rooted in community, though, so that we have these kind of conversations and change people's perspectives on these kind of things. So again, there's no hard, fast rule on these things. There's some people who I know who I don't talk to about certain topics, and there are other people who I very much will engage in them with, just because I know what will be effective, and I know when some people are inoculated from having any conversation or perspective brought about certain things. Let me see. Yeah, James Carville is just a nightmare. A little task, if anyone can ever find this video, I've been looking for it for a very long time, but there's a video of James Carville threatening a bunch of college students going into the 2016 election, where he basically paints this picture of what will happen if Trump gets elected. And of course, it's all about Vladimir Putin and Russia, but it's this incredibly specific fantasy that James Carville has, where like Putin just like walks out into the middle of Red Square, surrounded by Russians celebrating, and then in a very tight white shirt proceeds to give a speech in Russian that's translated by a CNN reporter there. This is, again, James Carville just weaving this wild tale to a bunch of young, educated kids who just had some very genuine criticisms and questions about Hillary Clinton. Basically, if you don't vote for Hillary Clinton, then Putin's going to give a celebratory speech in the middle of Red Square. Anyways, I've been trying to find it for a really long time. It was on like CNN or MSNBC or something like that. But if anyone is able to find that, please send it my way, because I want to get. I've been wanting to do something with that for a really long time. And Benjamin says, "What's the intro music for Left Reckoning?" Sounds like the alt country stuff I got into the late '90s. It's a friend, Christoph Brun. I linked to his website. I think I can do so again. Definitely check out his music. He's a good friend of Matt's, and I've been able to talk with him since we started this project, and it's been a really positive thing. Let me see. Is James Carville bringing college students into his fantasy? I don't know. I hope I don't really want to think about that too much. If we didn't have Vlad, we would have to invent one. I think that's very true too. The War Room is great because you see what a snake oil salesman he is. Yeah, I mean, I don't know why people still... I'm just amazed why liberals even still take him seriously, because this is somebody whose predictions have just been wrong time and time again. I mean, look, Trump was a disaster. There's no doubt about it. But the portrait that was painted, right, by Carville was just insane. And I mean, it's 5 years ago now, so I can't remember it all off the top of my head. It was like Trump was dangerous for a lot of reasons, but the ones that Carville cited were either so outlandish as to, never happen, or not to be the kind of threats that, we should have been focusing on. Well, definitely. Well, it's an awesome team. Definitely going to jam some piano over at home. Oh, nice, man. Well, send us that way. Michael Steele is another media shill. Yeah, that keeps everything in a flux on MSNBC. He really he makes mealy-mouthed statements that are meant for right-wing media as well as network audiences. Absolutely. Yeah. So Bryce wants to know if we'll maybe do some conversations on urban design. I would love to do that. I think those conversations are much needed, and I think looking at the difference, for example, of like Soviet, like cities like Moscow, for example, and American cities is very, very interesting. I will say, and I know this might make some people mad, that I do think that there are some unique things to the U.S. just in terms of our sprawl. It's unique compared to Europe. Doesn't mean we can't have nice things or anything like that, but I think that there's this kind of like, I don't know, people sometimes when there's a point that's a little unfortunate, people try to act like it's not true. It's like, look, we're not Germany, just in the sense that like, our cities aren't that old. That doesn't mean that we can't develop mass high-speed rail and public transportation, things like that. But, there are historical reasons why we have so much, so many small towns and suburban places. And a lot of that has to do with, a lot of that's because of bad reasons. I'm not defending it. But I think that it's important to reckon with. I'd love to talk to some kind of lefty urban planners about that kind of stuff. I find it to be really interesting, and absolutely would love to do that, especially if you have any suggestions. G. Burns says, and thanks for the super chat, James Carville is a less intelligent Fire Marshal Bill. Never stop doing what you're doing. You guys are the best. Really appreciate it. So Jacob has a question here. Hey, David, how do you respond when someone says, my union just encourages my lazy coworkers? I'm thinking specifically about teachers' unions. Well, thanks for the chat, first of all. I don't know. I mean, I understand those, those are obviously right-wing kind of talking points, right? Is that unions allow for there to be complacency in the workplace because people are too well protected. I think the best way, because honestly, if somebody's making that point and they're meaning it genuinely, it sounds like they have problems with their coworkers. I don't know. I mean, that's like I'm not an HR person, so I don't know how to alleviate that. But to make the point about why unions are important to them, maybe say like, well, do you feel that you're adequately protected from being wrongfully terminated? Like, I don't know, like help them recognize all the benefits that they're getting from that, system, from time off to the wages that they enjoy and things like that, and ask if they would prefer to not have those, so that they could get, Mary Sue or whoever fired that they don't like. Jane Moore, speaking my language, high-speed rail with a stop at Luby's with a beer garden. I think that'd be awesome. The Luby's, man, they're going down though. I don't know if even socialism could save the Luby's. I think, unfortunately, young people don't like getting cafeteria food as much as our grandparents did. Let me see. James, all right, I'll note that down. James Wilt. Definitely interested. Kenzo says, "Oh, this is a good point." And Kenzo's the one to ask about this. Definitely check out the Kenzo Shibana show. Thanks for watching, hanging out too, Kenzo. Kenzo says, unions protect due process. This means teachers who find themselves in trouble have protection and teachers who abuse students get due process and can be fired with proper documentation. That's a great point. If you're not, yeah, they just make sure that, things are fair. Oh, damn, is Fuddruckers closed? I didn't know that. It's American culture, baby. So that's a sad thing to hear. Jacobin had a cool article in Soviet architecture a few months back. Definitely interested in that. I mean, we've done stuff on TMBS about, things obviously like public housing. So like that's definitely something that's important to us as well. Let me see. Your grandparents had local cooks providing your lunches instead of Cisco. It's probably, I don't know, maybe. My grandfather was a military guy, so. Have y'all ever thought about doing an annual charity TMBS with the old TMBS sound bites and all? Seemed like it could be a nice way to do something good. I mean, I'm always interested in new ideas and things like that. Red Vienna definitely is an interesting piece, and we did some stuff on that on TMBS as well. I don't know. I mean, I'm happy to come up with something potentially. I don't know exactly how that would look, but we're always happy to do stuff. I will say it's like Matt and I have tried to do stuff. It's a little tough. Everyone has different ways of dealing with these things. Sometimes that's hard for me to watch old TMBS stuff personally. I'm just being honest. I love to do it. I think it's really important. We're trying to incorporate it as much as possible, but I'm just being honest. It's not, it takes me back in a way that's nice, but is not always good for this, right? Because it sort of takes me out of what I'm doing. My grandfather did attend public school. I'm sure he had a very nice local cook. Let me see. Let me see if there's anything else. Well, I don't know. Shoot. Yeah, I have to go cut down this tree in the back. Let me see. There's some stuff on Biden, and I wanted to get to, but I don't know. We might do that on Thursday. I think it's important. I just want to make one quick, kind of nice bow note on the Biden stuff regarding the budget, because we're still getting, these kind of fawning pieces. I mean, Paul Krugman is just unapologetic in his kind of salivating at Joe Biden and his administration, which is incredible. And I mean, that's who Joe Biden is trying to win over. So I guess I shouldn't be that surprised. It's not like Paul Krugman's a radical or is an important character or anything like that. But liberals think that he's the real deal economist. So you have to engage with this stuff. He had a piece out, I guess yesterday, the radical modesty of Biden's budget, which is such a great liberal piece, because what he says is like, oh, I think this is great, but also Biden's budget might sound cool, but it's actually not going to do that much. So it's safe, right? So it's one of those things where he's like talking to two people at the same time. He's talking to liberals, saying, well, this is great, and something to celebrate, but whispering at conservatives like, and actually it's not going to be that much money, and it's not going to functionally change our society, right? Which is the most perfect liberal argument, where you're trying to make everybody happy, and make sure that nothing really fundamentally changes, which is, again, the Biden promise. So that stuff is really interesting, but there's been some more think pieces from our comrades, even socialists in Europe and France and the UK, who are very, very much, taken aback by budget numbers, by Biden's budget numbers, without really spending a lot of time looking into how long things are taking to get put into place and what they're functionally doing. Notably, one thing that people have been pointing out is the kind of the lack or less reliance on public-private partnerships, notably like private financing. And I just wanted to say as a point on that for y'all to remember too, that, while there might be a shift from, more traditional like Obamonomics on these kind of things, that's not the case when it comes to the global South. And again, foreign policy is not something that's separate from American politics. America has to beat down. to maintain the kind of the current social structure in the United States, the current dominance of the classes that dominate in the United States. They have to prevent development and to promote poverty in the global South. And it should be noted that a big part of Biden's foreign policy and the packages that are going to the global South are very, very much reliant on private financing and public-private arrangements. So I think that it should be remembered that like there hasn't been some kind of retreat from Biden and Biden's team on this kind of ideology. Maybe just a little bit less so in Detroit and a little bit more in Guatemala. Let me see. There's a couple questions here that seem fun. Do you see any confluences between blockchain tech and progressive politics? Maybe, I don't know. I don't think about it too much. I have a lot of criticism of Bitcoin and all that kind of stuff, but blockchain is a technology I think can be used in different ways. What are your thoughts on the growing anti-vax movement? I mean, you gotta challenge it, and it's also there's a lot of different reasons for it. I think the one that is going to be the most useful to challenge, and it is also useful for us, is the stuff that comes from a genuine mistrust of the American healthcare system. I mean, I've got my 2 shots now, and I've already told people how I was afraid, and I do this for a living. I read and follow up on these things for a living. I was afraid that I was going to get hit with some kind of a bill, right? And that's definitely the case for a lot of folks. And there's that piece in the New York Times about how people were feeling that way. And interestingly enough, if you look at the comments, people are saying, well, actually, I did get these kind of surprise bills. This healthcare system is absolutely broken, and it's not surprising that people don't have a lot of trust for it. And we have to break through that as socialists and turn that into positive results and positive energy to get Medicare for all or socialized healthcare. And not let it fall into what it traditionally has in this country. A lot of like the granola stuff. I mean, my family, I have family members who are very hippy dippy with this kind of stuff. A lot of that stuff, scientifically, it's wrong, obviously. But it doesn't just come out of like a place of ignorance as much as it does an actual like experience of being burned by a healthcare system and a recognition that our healthcare system, because it's a profit-based system, is filled with dangers and lies. We should basically be trying to encourage people to take that realization and energy into political movements that would socialize healthcare for all of us. Because right now in this kind of anarchic situation that we have, it goes towards, being against, some medicine that will help get things back to normal after the pandemic. AS says, do you live in New York? I do not. I'm in Texas, but I was in New York before. Just curious about your thoughts on the mayoral race. The candidates polling the top 4 all seem pretty problematic. Yeah, man. I was texting some friends like, I'm very happy I'm not voting in that election. I'll say a couple things. Morales is an example of this kind of weird new synthesis that we're getting with what I call the non-socialist left. And for people who aren't familiar, her campaign is pretty much imploded after it was found out that they were union busting and had a really nasty work culture. Also, that she was a pretty cruel landlord. But before any of that stuff, people should have recognized that someone who's made their whole career in the NGO world is not somebody who's wanting to fight for working class people, working class New York folks, but it's somebody who's well versed in a kind of language to talk about systematic injustice and things like that, or talk about self-care. And we saw that, fall apart pretty spectacularly. The unfortunate thing, of course, is that, out of all of the people, there really is not a particularly left option, which is another good example, by the way, as to why DSA's practices of not feeling that they need to endorse in every race is good. Because I know a lot of people really wanted them to come behind Morales, and thank God that they didn't. I think that was a good call, but I don't know what's going to happen. I haven't been following it too closely. It seems like it's a bad situation across the board, though. And Yang obviously would be a nightmare. Let me see, y'all. Yeah, I was. Champagne Communista says I was nervous even fully knowing that how likely it'd be that I would have to pay. Yeah, man, I really thought that I was gonna get a tick too. I was gonna get a not tick. I was gonna get a ticket later. Somebody's gonna send me a bill. Um, yeah, and so again, so when people are interested in doing some lefty urbanism stuff, I like to do it. I want to find a way to do it in a real left working class rooted way, and this is a social critique, but it's one that I've seen. There is a kind of fixation with like urbanism that you get from a more kind of Elizabeth Warren crowd out there that I'm very, very, very suspicious of. Very suspicious of. That doesn't really take seriously important things like culture and community, except as buzzwords. So I'd like to find somebody who's really focused on, making life better for working people, because I think that, a lot of people are realizing that we're facing things like housing crisis and our infrastructure is broken and things of that nature. But that's recognizing those and making those critiques is not all necessarily going to get us into bring us in the most positive direction, because there's a lot of people who really are just gifts to private developers. I mean, there's that whole movement about basically, oh, it doesn't matter how we're thinking about building housing as long as they're doing it. It doesn't matter if we're trying to make it affordable, because it's going to create building more luxury housing will create more. Will create more affordable housing for everybody just by like having the rich people migrate into those luxury housing units and things like that, which has never been the damn case, especially if you live in a society where you can hold property as an asset. They're building some dumbass condo down the road from me right now. I live in South Austin, about 10 minutes from the house I grew up in. But I live, I'm not going to tell everyone where I live, but I live in an area that's pretty close to a more industrial part of town, right? Where there's a lot of warehouses and things like that. And they propose that they're going to put up a bunch of condos out there. And they just had a sale for it. They have barely even broken ground on these properties. And they sold out, I think, in 3 days. And the average price was $250,000 going all the way up to $600,000, right? And there's a housing issue here in Austin, no doubt about it. So some of it probably was genuine, but a lot of those houses, those condo units, were bought up by speculators who've been seeing that housing prices in Austin keep going up, 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 up. So they're going to buy units now and then sell them at a profit of $100,000 in 3 years or something like that, right? That's the biggest contributor to how unaffordable housing is this constant speculation, and city and state governments and national governments that are most interested in increasing property values rather than housing people, right? So again, I can't wait to talk to some more urban planning folks. But what I'm saying is there is that kind of like urbanism that I think is not very focused or interested in trying to solve or fight for working people, but is very much, just focused on I don't know, on being right. And thanks so much. Thanks so much, Bryce. I'm glad to see LR growing now. Keep up the great work. All right, y'all. I think I got to run because, as I said earlier, I have to cut down this tree. Actually, we got one fun question. What's your opinion on Rudy's barbecue? I mean, it's not very good. It's not bad. It's if people who don't know, it's like a kind of change. There's like barbecue is funny because there's great barbecue and then there's like roadside barbecue. Just like I don't care. I'm just like you would get a cheeseburger, and Rudy's is definitely that level. It's nothing special at all. But it is funny because it's one of those places that people who aren't from Texas go to and think it's like, oh, this is the legit place because it has like the decor and feel of a really authentic place. And I'm sure people remember like Chris Klizza and all these people taking pictures of what is very clearly Rudy's, kind of dry or cheap brisket. Again, there's nothing wrong with cheap food. As long as it's somewhat ethically produced and isn't absolutely terrible. But it's always funny when you see people like, oh, I know the real deal place, and it's like Rudy's or even Terry Black's or things like that. All right, y'all. I'm gonna go cut this down, and I'll see you on Thursday at 8. James, solidarity with the striking workers at Juiceland. I've been trying to follow that. It seems like there's a lot of different issues that have been popping up lately, but it seems to have been a really promising move so far. It's incorporated a lot of different people from the warehouse to the front of house. Solidarity with them in their fight. I'm hoping we see a positive result. I've seen that there's been movement. I know a lot of people haven't gone back to work yet, as they're wanting to have all of their demands met, which are some, material in the sense of wage increases, and some, political and trying to get certain acknowledgments from the system. Absolutely. Pretty solidarity with them. I'm curious to see what happens over the past in the next few days, because I've been watching it. I've been a little confused as to happen. I've been a little confused to see what the end result will look like. But absolutely solidarity with Juiceland workers and striking workers everywhere. Join us Thursday. We're going to be talking about Mexico, AMLO, I'm sure a few other subjects.